Anna had never imagined her life would turn out this way. So quiet, so routine, so unremarkable. At 52, she had settled into a rhythm that felt more like survival than living. Her days were filled with the predictable hum of work, errands, and evenings spent alone in her modest home, accompanied only by the comforting murmur of the television. Life wasn't bad, but it wasn't exactly fulfilling either. It was still. On Tuesday mornings, she did her grocery shopping. The aisles of the store were familiar, her list always the same. Milk, bread, some fruit, a small indulgence like chocolate to soften the edges of her solitude. She moved through the fluorescent-lit space like a ghost, invisible to the other shoppers who were too busy chasing after toddlers or rushing through their own lists. But on this particular Tuesday, as Anna reached for a bag of apples, her hand brushed against someone else's. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, startled. The voice that replied was warm and easy with a hint of humor. "No worries. Seems like we've got the same good taste in apples." She turned to see a man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. He had an open, friendly face, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was holding a bag of apples too, and his presence felt strangely out of place in this mundane setting, like a splash of color on a gray canvas. Anna felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks. "They're the best ones," she replied, managing a small smile. They exchanged a few more words, light, inconsequential things about the produce aisle, and how surprisingly difficult it was to find good apples these days. He introduced himself as Mark, and there was something about his manner, his easy confidence, that made Anna feel seen. It was a fleeting encounter, lasting no more than a couple of minutes. But as she watched him walk away, his basket swinging at his side, Anna felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, a small, unexpected spark in the midst of her otherwise uneventful morning. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that it was nothing. Just a brief, friendly interaction with a stranger. But as she loaded her groceries into the car and drove home, she couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind. The way his eyes had met hers, the way his smile had lingered just a little too long. For the first time in years, Anna found herself looking forward to next Tuesday, the following Tuesday. Anna found herself scanning the aisles of the grocery store with an unusual sense of anticipation. It was absurd, really. What were the odds of running into the same person twice in such a sprawling, impersonal place? But there was a part of her, small and shy, that hoped. When she rounded the corner to the produce section, she saw him. Mark. He was crouched by the carrots, examining a bundle with an exaggeratedly serious expression that made her smile despite herself. "Still on the hunt for perfect produce?" she asked, her voice lighter than she remembered it being in years. Mark looked up, surprised but pleased. The apple expert. Glad to see you again. Do you have any insider tips on these carrots?" They laughed, and just like that, the conversation flowed as naturally as a stream finding its course. They joked about the endless choices in the grocery store and swapped favorite recipes. Mark mentioned his attempts at cooking were a work in progress, and Anna confessed she had a soft spot for simple, comforting meals. "Maybe you can give me some pointers," he said, holding up a bag of rice. "This alone shouldn't be dinner, right?" Anna chuckled. "Not unless you're really desperate." As they talked, Anna felt an unexpected lightness in her chest. It wasn't just Mark's youthful energy, though that was undeniable. It was the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, the way he listened as though her words mattered. When they reached the checkout, they lingered a moment longer, neither wanting the conversation to end. "You come here every Tuesday?" he asked casually, though his tone hinted at more than idle curiosity. "Yes," Anna replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's part of my routine." "Maybe I'll see you next week then," he said with a grin, and before she could respond, he was gone, waving as he headed out the door. For the rest of the day, Anna felt a strange energy coursing through her, a mix of excitement and disbelief. What was this? A coincidence? A simple kindness from a stranger? Or something else entirely? Over the weeks that followed, their encounters became regular. Sometimes it was just a brief chat in the produce section. Other times, they wandered the aisles together, comparing notes on their grocery lists. Mark told her about his job at a nearby community center and his passion for teaching kids how to paint. Anna shared snippets of her life, careful to leave out the parts that felt too vulnerable, too telling. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so freely or felt so alive. Mark's presence wasn't just a welcome break in her routine. It was a reminder of a version of herself she had long forgotten. The part of her that was curious, warm, and open to the world. And though she didn't dare admit it yet, even to herself, something deeper was beginning to stir. Anna had always been practical, the kind of woman who prided herself on staying grounded. Feelings, especially unexpected ones, were things she neatly packed away, like old clothes that no longer fit. But as the weeks passed, her Tuesdays became something she looked forward to with a growing sense of anticipation. It wasn't just the conversations, though they were lovely. Mark had a way of making the most mundane topics, what cereal to buy, whether the new yogurt brand was worth trying, feel engaging, even significant. It was the way he looked at her, his attention unwavering, as though she were the most interesting person in the room. And yet, Anna told herself it was nothing. A friendly connection, nothing more. Until the day he touched her hand. They had both reached for a box of tea on the shelf, their fingers brushing briefly. It was a simple, innocent moment, but Anna felt a jolt, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. She froze, her hand lingering just a second too long before she pulled it away. "Sorry," Mark said, though his voice was light, his smile easy. "It's fine," Anna replied, her voice softer than usual. But inside, something shifted. That night, as she sat in her living room with the tea they had both recommended to each other, Anna couldn't stop replaying the moment. The warmth of his hand, the spark that had traveled through her. She tried to push it aside, to dismiss it as a fleeting, meaningless reaction. But the truth was undeniable. Mark wasn't just a pleasant distraction. He wasn't just a friend. She felt something for him. The realization hit her like a wave, leaving her both exhilarated and terrified. How had she let this happen? She was a grown woman, old enough to know better. And yet, the thought of seeing Mark again filled her with a sense of longing that she couldn't ignore. The next time they met, Anna was hyper-aware of every detail. The way his laugh echoed in the aisle, the way he leaned closer when she spoke, as if her words held a secret he wanted to uncover. As they said goodbye, Mark paused, his hand lingering on the cart handle. "You know, Anna," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I always look forward to running into you." Her heart skipped. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply smiled, a mix of warmth and uncertainty in her expression. When she got home, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of tea. This was no longer something she could ignore. Her feelings for Mark were real, and they were growing stronger by the day. But along with the thrill came doubt. What could he possibly see in her? She was twice his age, a woman whose life was well past its prime. Yet, despite the fear, a tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind. What if, the next week, Anna stood in front of her closet, sifting through her clothes with a mixture of annoyance and apprehension. It wasn't as though she didn't have anything to wear. She had plenty of clothes. But everything felt wrong. Too plain. Too outdated. Too safe. Ridiculous, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. Why did it matter what she wore to the grocery store? She wasn't going there to impress anyone. Yet the thought of Mark seeing her in the same worn cardigan she'd worn the last few times made her hesitate. She finally settled on a soft blue blouse, one that complemented her eyes, paired with dark jeans that made her feel just a bit more confident. When she arrived at the store, her heart raced as she scanned the aisles, searching for him. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter if he was there or not, but deep down she knew it did. Then she spotted him near the bakery, studying a loaf of bread like it held the secrets of the universe. She almost laughed out loud. "Deciphering carbs today," she teased as she approached. Mark turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Anna, you caught me. I'm trying to figure out if this is artisan enough to justify the price." They fell into their usual rhythm, their banter flowing easily. But today, there was an undercurrent of something more. Anna noticed the way Mark's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual, the way his smile softened when she spoke. At one point, as they stood near the deli counter debating the merits of smoked turkey versus honey-roasted ham, Mark glanced at her and said, "You make this so much more fun, you know that?" Anna felt her cheeks warm. She quickly looked away, pretending to inspect the cheese selection. "I could say the same about you," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Mark hesitated. "Hey, Anna," he began, scratching the back of his neck in a way that made him look boyish. "I was thinking, maybe we could grab coffee sometime. Outside the grocery store, I mean." Anna froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The words hung in the air, charged with possibility. "I'd like that," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. As she drove home, Anna felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. Coffee. It was innocent enough, a friendly gesture, but she couldn't ignore what it meant for him to ask and for her to agree. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a tangle of hope and fear. This wasn't just about Mark. It was about stepping into uncharted territory, daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for something extraordinary. But as much as she wanted to embrace the excitement, the doubts crept in like shadows. Could this really be happening? Could a man like Mark truly see her as more than a grocery store companion? The questions loomed large, but for the first time in years, Anna felt a spark of something she thought she'd lost forever. Possibility. The days between their conversation at the grocery store and the coffee invitation felt like an eternity. Anna found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, each moment bringing a new wave of hope, followed by a tide of uncertainty. She replayed every word Mark had said, every glance, every subtle gesture, over and over in her mind. The simplest things seemed to carry so much weight now. She knew she had to act. The thought of just waiting for their next encounter at the store, letting time slip by without taking any step forward, gnawed at her. But what if she was wrong? What if it was all just a harmless flirtation on his part, a playful moment that meant nothing to him? She was older, wiser. Surely she could tell the difference between something real and a passing fancy. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she was beginning to care about him. More than care, in fact. She liked him. There was a warmth in her chest every time she thought about him, a flutter in her stomach when she imagined seeing him again. But if she wanted to see where this could go, she would have to take a leap. The idea hit her unexpectedly one morning, while she was making tea in the kitchen. Mark had invited her to coffee, but she had yet to give him a firm response. She could have just agreed to meet at a cafe, a neutral space where the air was filled with the hum of casual conversation. But that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted more. Why not invite him here, she whispered to herself, the idea taking root as she sipped her tea. At first, the thought seemed absurd. What was she thinking? A man, especially a younger man, coming to her home? It felt like crossing a boundary she wasn't sure she was ready for. But the more she considered it, the more she realized that inviting him to her house might be the only way to truly connect, to have a conversation that wasn't rushed by the constraints of a public place. She wanted to see if what she felt was real. She wanted to take her time with him. The next time she saw him at the store, Anna's nerves were on edge, but her resolve was clear. She'd already decided that this was the right thing to do, even if it terrified her. She felt a mixture of excitement and vulnerability, but that was all part of the process. "Mark," she began, a little hesitantly at first, "I was thinking, maybe we could skip the coffee shop and just," she paused, taking a deep breath. "Maybe you'd like to come over to my place instead." He looked at her, surprised, but then his smile spread, warm and easy. "I'd like that," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't know you were such a rebel." Anna laughed, the sound catching her off guard, and the tension in her shoulders eased. It was silly, really, that she'd spent so much time worrying about something as simple as an invitation. He wasn't going to judge her. He wasn't going to think she was strange for wanting to spend time with him outside of the confines of the grocery store. "Great," she said, her heart lifting with the relief of making the decision. "I'll make sure the place is presentable." His laugh filled the space between them, and Anna realized in that moment that this was real. This wasn't just an idea or a fantasy. She had invited him into her life, into her space, and she wasn't going to back down now. As they said their goodbyes, Mark promised to come over the next evening. Anna couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake, but deep down, she knew that this was exactly what she needed. Whatever happened, she was ready to face it head-on. That night, she spent hours preparing. It wasn't about impressing him. It was about creating a space where they could be themselves. She made a simple dinner, something comforting, a homemade pasta with fresh basil, garlic, and a glass of wine. Nothing too fancy, just a gesture of kindness and an invitation to relax, to connect. When the doorbell rang the next evening, Anna's pulse quickened, but there was no turning back now. This moment was years in the making, and she was about to find out what it meant to truly open her heart again. Anna opened the door with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Mark stood there, looking slightly more put together than usual, dressed in a soft sweater and jeans that made him look casual but effortlessly handsome. His eyes sparkled as they met hers, and she felt an almost electric pull between them. "Hi," he said, his voice light but filled with something deeper she couldn't quite place. "You look good. I like the place." He glanced around, taking in the cozy, understated charm of her living room. It was a small apartment, but it was hers, filled with books, soft lighting, and a few plants she'd managed to keep alive. "Thanks," Anna replied, feeling herself blush despite the calmness of his tone. "I try." She stepped aside to let him in, and as he crossed the threshold, she had a brief moment of wondering if this was really happening, if she had just opened her life in a way she hadn't done in years. The warmth of the room embraced them both, and she motioned for him to take a seat on the couch. Anna noticed his slight hesitation before he sat down, but it was fleeting. He settled in with a relaxed air, and she followed suit, sitting across from him with a glass of wine in her hand. "I hope you're hungry," Anna said, trying to sound casual. "I made pasta. It's nothing special, but I thought it might be nice." He smiled warmly, his gaze lingering on her. "It's perfect," he said, his voice steady. "It's all about the company, right?" The words sent a shiver of something deeper through her, and she couldn't help but smile back, relieved to see he wasn't putting up any barriers. There was no tension in the air, only the soft hum of two people starting to really understand each other. Over the next few hours, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything. Their childhoods, the books they liked, the movies that made them laugh, the quiet moments in life that had shaped them. Anna felt herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years, sharing things she hadn't thought about in a long time. Mark listened, truly listened, with a depth that made her feel seen, understood. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way he looked at her, with genuine interest, as if every detail of her was fascinating. The way his hand brushed against hers when they both reached for the last piece of bread. The laughter they shared over an old, embarrassing story she told about her teenage years. There was a connection here, an intimacy growing between them, and Anna was beginning to see just how deeply she could feel for him. As the evening wore on, they both relaxed more, the tension of initial awkwardness completely gone. Mark leaned back, stretching his legs out in front of him, and Anna took a deep breath, trying to steady the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm glad you came over," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, though she didn't mean for it to be. "I wasn't sure if I was being too forward. I mean, inviting you here. It felt right, but it also felt strange, you know?" Mark turned toward her, his expression more serious than before. "I'm glad you did, Anna," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I didn't want to just keep seeing you in the store, exchanging pleasantries. I wanted to know you, really know you." The words hung in the air for a long moment, their significance settling between them. Anna's heart raced as she realized how much she had hoped for this, to be seen, to be understood, to have someone look at her the way Mark did. She had been afraid, at first, of how much she wanted this, how much she was willing to risk. But here now, with him sitting across from her, she realized she was ready. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was filled with understanding, but also something else. A promise. Mark shifted a little closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. The tension in the air was palpable now, charged with something unspoken. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of tension that pulled you in, made you want to lean in, to let go of the hesitation and just be. Before either of them could say another word, he leaned forward, just enough to bridge the space between them. Anna's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time that night, the world outside the room seemed to fade away. This wasn't just a visit anymore, it was a turning point. Their lips met, soft and tentative at first, as if neither of them wanted to rush this moment. But as the kiss deepened, Anna felt her heart beat faster, her body responding to him in a way she hadn't felt in years. She hadn't known how much she longed for this, how much she longed for him, until this very moment. When they finally pulled back, it wasn't with the rush of desire, but with something more profound. Something that spoke of connection, of discovery, of the slow unraveling of years of silence and solitude. Anna took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a realization that she was capable of loving again, of feeling again. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something beautiful. The evening lingered in the quiet spaces between them, each passing minute adding depth to the connection that had been born in the most unexpected of ways. As Mark made his way to the door, the moment felt heavy with both the sweetness of what had just transpired and the uncertainty that still loomed over it. Anna stood there for a moment, watching him, feeling the warmth of his touch still lingering on her skin. "Thank you for tonight," he said, his voice softer than before. "I'm glad we did this." Anna smiled, a genuine, almost wistful smile that reached her eyes. "Me too," she said, though part of her still struggled to grasp the full reality of it. A man, younger than her, had come into her life like a sudden spark in the dark, and in the span of a few weeks, he had unraveled something in her that she thought was long buried. When the door clicked shut behind him, Anna stood for a moment in silence, leaning against the frame, her thoughts tumbling over one another. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for so long, but there was a part of her that hesitated to fully embrace it. The world was not kind to women like her, older, with years of history behind them, and yet still longing for more, still capable of loving, still yearning for intimacy. She had always lived under the assumption that love, the kind she had known in her youth, was something that belonged to the past. But now, as she stood alone in her apartment, she realized that love was not bound by age. It was not confined to a specific time in life. The emotions that stirred inside her, desire, longing, joy, were as real now as they had been when she was young. Mark's presence had awoken something in her she thought was long dormant. His warmth, his attentiveness, his laughter, all of it had reached her in ways she couldn't have predicted. And yet she wondered, as the quiet moments of the night stretched on, what this meant. What did it mean for her to open her heart to someone so much younger? What would others think? What would her friends say? Or even her family if they knew? She had never cared much for judgment in the past, but now, there was a deeper weight to those considerations. She wasn't the young woman she once was, the one who could fall in love without a second thought. There were consequences to this kind of love, societal ones that were difficult to ignore. But even as these thoughts swirled, Anna felt a shift inside her, a release of sorts. She had spent so many years wrapped in the comfortable confines of routine, of loneliness, of quiet resignation. But now she had this, a connection, an understanding, a love that didn't care about numbers on a calendar, but rather the chemistry, the closeness, the way two people fit together, regardless of age. As Anna looked out the window, her thoughts turning inward, she realized something else. That age, the years that had passed, had given her something precious. The wisdom to know what she wanted, the clarity to see what was real, and the confidence to pursue it, regardless of the obstacles. The truth was, this love, this unexpected connection with Mark, wasn't something to be ashamed of. It wasn't something to hide. It was something to celebrate. It was her heart reclaiming its rightful place in the world. She felt the weight of the decision she had made, inviting him into her life, into her heart. It had been a risk, a leap of faith into the unknown. But in that moment, standing in the quiet of her apartment, Anna felt a sense of peace. She was no longer running from what she wanted. She wasn't fighting the idea that love could come in many forms, at any stage of life. She knew there would be doubts. She knew that the world might not understand. But what she also knew was this: love didn't need to be defined by age or expectation. It simply needed to be real. And this was real. As she prepared for bed, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, Anna felt excited. She felt alive, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Her heart wasn't finished yet, And neither, it seemed, was love. The following days passed with a kind of quiet anticipation that Anna hadn't felt in years. The mundane tasks that once filled her hours, the grocery runs, the endless cups of coffee at her kitchen table, now had a different kind of meaning. Each moment was touched by a sense of longing, a joy that was new and unfamiliar, but welcome all the same. Anna often found herself thinking about what she had learned, about what love truly meant at her age. The years of solitary routines, of keeping her heart closed off to protect herself from the world, had been a kind of refuge, but it had also been a prison. She had learned to convince herself that this was enough, that she didn't need more, that love was a thing of the past. But Mark had shattered that illusion, softly and unexpectedly. He had reminded her that the heart is never finished growing, that it is capable of deep, transformative love no matter the years that pass. Love, she realized, wasn't a finite resource. It wasn't something that ran out as time passed or faded with age. It was a constant, something that ebbed and flowed with the rhythms of life. The fact that she had opened herself to a connection with someone so much younger than her wasn't a mistake. It was a gift, one she was learning to embrace, not with shame or fear, but with pride and gratitude. She had spent so many years focusing on what she didn't have, what had slipped away. But now, she saw the truth. Life was about the moments we dare to reach for, no matter how unlikely or unconventional they might seem. If she could offer advice to anyone, it would be to follow their heart, wherever it led, without fear of judgment or the constraints of time. As for Mark, he was part of that new journey. He had never seemed bothered by the age difference between them. He had a way of making her feel seen, truly seen, as a woman, not defined by her years, but by the love and joy she could give and receive. He brought something out of her that she hadn't known she still had. The desire to live fully, to embrace the kind of love that didn't care about timelines or societal expectations. Anna had no idea where their relationship would go, and she wasn't in a hurry to find out. For once, she wasn't thinking about the future. She was simply enjoying the present, the warmth of his smile, the sound of his laughter, the way his hand felt when it brushed against hers. It was enough for now. She stood at the window one afternoon, the sun casting a golden glow across her living room. A soft breeze filtered through the curtains, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the moment settle in. She had fought for so long against the idea of love after a certain age. She had believed it was something other people could have, not her. But love, she understood now, wasn't a privilege, it was a right. It was a force that could find you anywhere, in any place, at any stage of life. And no matter the twists and turns, no matter the judgment or the questions from others, Anna had found that love could be anything she chose it to be: bold, transformative, and full of possibility. With a soft smile, she turned from the window, her heart still full, and waited for whatever would come next.